Well, good evening. Happy Shabbat. Welcome to Yada Yahweh Radio. We've got both Kirk and JB here. Kirk's at home, I guess, this evening, but headed back to the hospital. Terry continues to struggle, but to hang in there. We're appreciative of that. Well, today we learned that where China has tried to assure the world that the worst of the coronavirus is over and they want people to go back to work, that I understand about just shy of 70,000 people now worldwide have been affected with it. That's one in about 100,000. And that the 17, 18, no, a little shy of that, maybe 15,000 or 1,500 people have died of it, which means you have about a 2% fatality rate from this virus. And 2% fatality rate, if it's just a flu, would be very high, but 2% fatality rate for a pandemic that is going to have a significant influence on the world is pretty low. But nonetheless, that's the latest on it. Donald Trump, though, we are lucky that we have him in America as our president because he announced that he was responsible and should be given credit for keeping it out of America.
Have you been to San Francisco?
If you go into any hospital right now, they've got coronavirus quarantine awards. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that is I don't think that's the case by any measure.
By a long shot.
Yeah. I also read today that, according to BBC News, that astronomers want public funds to search for intelligent life. My concern here is why would you need astronomers to do it? Why don't we?
Let's find it here on Earth first.
See if we can find it here.
Sorry.
I mean, that really is the reality of it, because as Yahowah was saying, there's a reason that God found no one to work with. He searched the world for intelligent life and couldn't find it on this planet.
Oh, that's funny.
As sad as that is, it appears to be true. We did have a hypocrite sighting, by the way, in France. The top candidate for mayor, I guess, of Paris, has been running on a family values ticket, where he constantly cites how important his wife and his children are to him, and how he wants to be the mayor of families. Well, a sex tape emerged from him, and sex text where he's having a grand old time with another woman outside of marriage. And so you would think he'd be embarrassed and just say, oh, well, woe is me, but nonetheless, he's blaming the media for outing him as opposed to just taking responsibility. Which reminds me, I don't know if any of you are following, because it's in the playground of life, but the Houston Astros were caught cheating in the World Series. The World Series they won from the Dodgers a few years back was one based entirely on fraud. Had they not cheated, stealing signs for the pitchers through electronic means, they would not have won. It's if you study the films that and look at the data that can be derived from it, no question in the world, they all cheated. They did so willingly, knowingly, and it had a profound influence on the games. And they ended up winning the World Series by having cheated. And today, their owner comes out, and he is supposed to have his mea culpa and says, I don't want to be held responsible. I didn't do anything wrong. None of my players should be held accountable. They didn't do anything wrong. What we did didn't have any influence on the game. And you just say, if baseball, which is a game that has long been a gentleman's sport where playing by the rules matters, and if they're not willing to strip the Houston Astros of their World Series title, then they will lose so much credibility that a deteriorating fan base is going to continue to plummet to the point that only people who have nothing else to do with their lives will watch another baseball game. But it just shows you how sadly, deeply we have fallen to the point where the only reason that there's any remorse is they got caught. And many of them are not upset with their own behavior, but upset with teammates for ratting them out. You're a Texas guy there, JB. Yeah, what is it with Texans that they can't seem to admit that they were wrong?
Great big egos. They say everything's bigger in Texas, and, well, ego's one of them.
Well, I tell you what, that whole episode is a gigantic blight on the organization, on Texas, on baseball, and it's just really sad. Speaks volumes about our fallen character. Now, this is what is being conveyed by my upright one, Yahweh, your Redeemer, who delivers and saves you, Israel, and his set-apart one, regarding the despised and despicable soul, for the repulsive and abhorrent behavior of Goy, of the confluence of ethnicities, cultures, religions, and governments, among those who exercise authority and serve this narrative. We'll continue with Yeshaya 49:7 in a moment, but since we're speaking of Texas, Texas is comprised of a disproportionate number of Goy. They do not ask if you go to church, they ask what church you go to. And it is a place of abhorrent behavior. It is a place where there are very few people that would ever be recipients of this message because, well, the leading supermarket in Texas, last time I checked, is Heeb. And there isn't anybody that sees anything wrong with that. I remember that when I was at a Heeb, since there was no other choice, which is a slang term, a derogatory term, I was there during Pesach with my youngest son, and I was looking for matzah. I was looking for lamb. And so I went to somebody that worked there and stocking shelves and says, it's Passover. Do you have matzah? No, we don't carry any Jewish food. Why would we carry Jewish food? There are no Jews around here. We're not a Jewish community. And I went to the butcher and said, do you have lamb? It's Passover. No, we don't carry lamb. No one eats lamb around here. We eat beef. So it's just kind of perfect for Texas to hear about the despised and despicable soul who is the author of an inspiration behind half of the Christian New Testament. That would be Paul. This says that government heads of state and institutional leaders shall be seen rising up along with their high-ranking officials. But because of Yahweh, they will bow down, prostrating themselves while seeking to explain themselves to the one who, to show the way to the benefits of the relationship, is truthful, trustworthy, and reliable, the set-apart one of Yisrael, the one who is chosen and prefers you. Yahweh chose Yisrael. It's his choice. God could have chosen any people on earth. He chose Yisrael. And it's astonishing that Christians can't handle that. They're so full of themselves, so goddamn self-serving and egotistical. They would have their God be a liar, such that he reneges on his preference and promises to Yisrael and gives all of that benefit to them. Well, I'm here to tell you that ain't going to happen. And the set-apart one prefers Yisrael. That's who he's chosen. That's who he's returning to. That's who he made promises to. That's who the covenant is based upon. That represents 100% of those who were given the opportunity to serve as his prophets. And what's so astonishing about this whole thing is the entirety of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, which pertains to what, about 80% of the Bible they're carrying around? It's written in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a Hebrew name. It all takes place in Israel. All of the people who speak for God are Jews. It's Jews that are rescued from Egypt. How is it that you can have a religion that is anti-Semitic, that despises Jews, when everything in it was brought to you courtesy of Jews, including the Passover lamb, Yosha?
Yeah.
He's a Yahud, Jew. His name means Yahweh saves. Even the false prophet who inspired half of your goddamn New Testament, and I say goddamn, not to be the curse, but it's a full sentence. God separates himself from. Yeah, statement of fact. Mm-hmm. God forsakes, separates from. That's Christian New Testament. That's what damn means. Even it came courtesy of Jews. Now, was there a Gentile among the 12 disciples?
No.
Not one. Did Yosha ever leave Israel?
No.
No. Was there a single goy who Yahweh inspired as a prophet?
Not a one.
Not a one. So, why is it that you can be so such self-denial, so much cognitive dissonance, that you can take this anti-Semitic rant of replacement theology, that your church replaced Israel, and that Christians replaced Jews, and that your Dionysus-based Jesus Christ, who you couldn't even call by his Hebrew name or by a title that would have been a Hebrew title, that why is it you need to rid Dowd of every promise that God made to him and give it to this Jesus Christ to shore up his credibility? What's wrong with you, Christians? And here it says the institutional leaders, well, they rise up along with their high-ranking officials, but what's God going to do? He's going to bow down, prostrating themselves, while they seek to explain themselves. To whom?
Well, they preach that.
To the one who is trustworthy and reliable, the set-apart one of Yisrael. Go ahead.
Well, I say they preach it all the time. They tell you to get down, get on your knees, close your eyes, bow your head. I think it's fair. As justice there. There's no place when someone is bowing down when they're in good shape with Yahweh. He lifts up.
That is correct.
Walk with.
That is correct. Yep. And what's so amazing about this, and just interesting, it's an irony, is those that require people to bow down to them and to their God are going to have to bow down before God. And those who stand up with God, who are Sadak, they will never bow down in God's presence. So if you're with God, you're either standing up and going to continue to live with him and enjoy his company, or you're bowed down in judgment. And those who will bow down in judgment are those who have perpetrated the myth that God wants to be worshipped. And that's just such a stupid myth. That's why it's so much of religion. You just shake your head and say, you shouldn't really feel sorry for the religious. It's so thoughtless, so moronic, so stupid to be religious. I mean, the very idea that a God would create an inferior being to worship him is repulsive. Mm-hmm. It just says that the religious person who is going to bow down before God, who is going to lift God up in praise, who's going to go to a worship service, that person is thoughtless. They're irrational. Because a God that would create an inferior being to worship him is insecure, and twisted to the point of you'd never want to be in their company. A God who would want to be feared by a being that he created is sadistic. Now, therefore, thus says Yahweh, during the time of acceptance, I will respond to you, and in the day of salvation, I will assist and support you, increasing everything about you, and I will protect you. Now, before we finish this, think about this for a moment. According to Yahweh, there is a time of acceptance, ba'eth ratzon, a time of making favorable choices, of approval, of being favored, being accepted, and being pleased with the outcome, whereby during this time of acceptance, Yahweh himself will respond to those who are accepted. We are moving rapidly towards this. It is a time that's going to end and be completely over within, well, just a matter of 13 years from now. And as we approach that final day, there is a point in time where there is no opportunity for acceptance. So if you are Yisrael, if you are a Yisraelite, you are a Udem, you need to be on your game at this point. You need to be listening to what Yahweh has to say. You need to be Torah observant, and you better figure out, either by reading what we have shared via these translations, listening to these programs, or do it on your own, but start paying attention to Yahweh's Torah, prophets, and Psalms, and present yourself acceptable. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Dowd certainly wasn't.
No, nobody was.
But you need to be in an accepting mode. And what does that mean? Well, Yahweh wants us to accept the terms and conditions of his covenant. He wants us to accept the invitations to attend his Moed Mikre. There are 5 terms of the covenant. You need to walk away from your country, from politics, from religion. Walk away from these things. And then God wants us to walk to him and become perfect. Oh, there's only one path to God. It's 7 steps long. It begins with Pesach, the doorway up to life, and that's combined with matzah, the means to our perfection, so that we can become adopted by God, such that 7 sevens later, on the promise of 7, we're enriched and empowered, fulfilling the benefits of that covenant. Yahweh was really clear as to what he expects from us, which is to trust and rely upon him, which is one of the 5 conditions of the covenant, which is a very different concept than faith. Mm-hmm. Trust means you have to know to trust. You have to understand to rely. And then God says, be observant. Observe closely, examining, carefully considering the terms and conditions of my mitzvah, the covenant, of my relationship agreement. And then the
only
fifth
place
is,
you can find it.
Yeah, it's only one place. Yeah, it's in the first. It's not hard to find. It's in and dominates the first book of the Torah. You know what the Torah is? It starts with in the beginning. The first book is Bereshith, been corrupted to a Greek title. Yeah, I mean, what in the world is the people's problem? All of the titles for these books are Greek. It's not written in Greek. It's not Genesis. It's Bereshith, in the beginning. It's not Exodus. That's a Greek term. It's Shemot, names.
Just Christianity's disdain for all things Hebrew.
Yeah. Oh, disgusting.
Yeah,
It's really not. Yeah, it's not Leviticus. Well, that's not a Greek term, but there's no V
in Hebrew.
In Hebrew. And the name of the book isn't Leviticus anyway. You know, it's about Korah being called out. And Deuteronomy, second law? No. Yahweh's name for the book is not a single law, much less a second one. And of course, they call it the second law because Christians have been beguiled into this notion, as but a lot of religious Jews, that God has a bunch of laws to be obeyed. I'm sorry, but he doesn't have a single law to be obeyed. There isn't even a Hebrew word for obey. Torah doesn't mean law. It means teaching and guidance. And so people have just been hoodwinked, and they think that because, there's a whole list of laws in the first 4 books, that when Moses reiterates them, that must be the second law, Deuteronomy. No, it's Debarim, words. And you ever wonder why Debarim exists? Because Debarim is significant parts of Debarim, most of it are in Moshe's voice, not Yahweh's voice. And they, what is said is typically a repetition of or a summary of what was said previously. So why even have it? What's the purpose of Debarim?
It's Yah doing what he loves most, working with man.
Yeah.
That is it.
His commentary, Moshe's commentary. Yeah.
Right. Yep. So, if you start with Bereshith, what you see is God begins working alone, but boy, he doesn't get out of the second chapter and all of a sudden, he's got someone to play with, someone to spend time with, someone to work with, someone to enjoy his company. And that quickly develops into working with Noach to save humankind within the Salma. And shortly thereafter, we're dealing with Abraham and have chapter after chapter after chapter devoted to the development of the covenant relationship. And so he begins right away saying, I'm going to develop this covenant through an individual because that's the prime objective. And then as we enter Shabbat, the book called Names, God's introducing himself to us by name, telling us how to pronounce his name, saying it's based on the verb haya, to exist. And he's liberating his people, the opposite of religion. He is not binding them. He is not causing them to be fearful or submissive. No, he's freeing them, liberating them, which is the whole purpose. And he chose to work through Moshe to communicate his teaching and to lead his people out of Mitzrayim. It's one of the things to just say Mitzrayim, and I didn't figure this out. Jackie, who's done such a marvelous job of editing his books, figured this one out, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I never did see it because it was really obvious, but she nonetheless figured it out, and I rewrote one of the chapters to incorporate this. Mitzrayim, well, it's Mitzrah, right? Mitzrayim would just be plural. So it's Mitzrah. Well, there is a term that Yahweh uses all the time, sar. It means to confine, to trouble, to thin, to oppress. It is to put someone in dire straits. The time of Jacob's trouble is based upon sar. And so Mitzrah is the combination of which is the Hebrew interrogatory that says, ponder this, question this, consider the implications of being confined, being hard-pressed, being put in dire straits, being in a situation that is indeed troubling. And so it's very clear that while the time of Jacob's troubles is a future event on our horizon, Mitzrayim means think about these kinds of troubles. Because what Yahweh wants to liberate his people from going forward, which would be to free them from the influence of religious, political, and geographic Babylon during the last days, he's taking them from the same kind of politics and religion and economic schemes that were so troubling to them in Egypt. And so it's really going right back to where we began, just as we're returning to the Garden of Eden with the celebration of Sukkah upon Yahweh's return, just as Mitzrayim is the crucibles of human oppression, and therefore our opportunity to ponder the kind of things that Yahweh was asking us to walk away from, it plays right into the future when Yahweh was calling his people out of Babylon. So this goes on to say, so now therefore, thus says Yahweh, during the time of acceptance, I will respond to you. And in the day of salvation, I will assist and support you, increasing everything about you, and I will protect you. To raise the family, I have offered you a covenant. Well, I love that. Kum is the Hebrew word to raise, to establish, to confirm, to stand with, to honor. So, kum, to raise the family. I have offered you Nathan. Nathan means I have given you.
Gift.
The covenant. Isn't that beautiful? The family-oriented relationship. Therefore, the land, which was ravaged and will become appalling, will be reapportioned, repossessed, and maintained as an inheritance. Yeah. So much for the notion of a new covenant, right? How can there be a new covenant if Yahweh is doing all of this, the time of acceptance and salvation is for his people? Yeah. When he says, to raise the family, I offered you the covenant. Therefore, the land, which became appalling, crawling with Goyim, is going to be reapportioned as an inheritance. Well, he offered it to Israel. He's giving it back to Israel. Oh, so much for a two-state solution.
Yeah.
So much for the Twistian and Frankensteinian claims to the land, as well as the Fakistinians. According to Yah, the ultimate Zionist, his plan is to remove the appalling Gentiles and give it back to the Jews. And of course, so much for Paul's claim to have been sent out as a light by God to save the Gentiles. They're going to be depopulated. And the opposite is going to happen. In fact, it wasn't long ago that I was translating, I think it was in Yirmiyah, and Yah's going to wipe out the last of the Gentiles. So, I am a Gentile. So are you, Kirk, I think, and JB.
As far as
primarily,
I know.
as far as I know. I've taken the DNA test. And in fact, Yah was constantly talking about in the last days.
I am, but I'm
using
Yahweh's eyes.
Same thing for me. And so you cease being a Gentile when you're grafted into Yisrael. But for the rest of the Gentiles that stay estranged from Yisrael, who don't like Jews, I'm sorry for you, but God's going to wipe you out. Going to wipe out every Gentile institution.
They're going to get what they want. They won't have to be around Jews anymore.
There you go. Well, there'll be some. They're going to be. I got to tell you, there's going to be some Jews in Sheol, starting with Shaol himself.
Yes,
they're going to get very far.
And Akiba, Maimonides,
and Adolf Hitler, and
don't forget Muhammad either.
Yeah.
From Yathrib. Duh.
Yeah, this is true. Of the tribe of the Bnei Hashem, the tribe of Hashem. Hashem is the name. Yeah, the name.
The name. God.
How do people miss such obvious details?
Or the fact that Yathrib is called Yathrib. Right? Or the fact that the Quran itself speaks of the population of Yathrib, and there are 4 clans in Yathrib, and 3 of the floor are Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Or that everybody with any money and means in Yathrib was Jewish, according to the Quran and Hadith, and yet Muhammad's mom, after his father died, had the wherewithal to have him raised by someone else.
Nanny, yeah.
And it wouldn't be possible if she wasn't Jewish.
There. No.
Yep. Of course, we know that Muhammad was Jewish because there are descendants of Muhammad who actually prove their
DNA
descendancy from Muhammad, and they've had DNA tests, and they come back as J1. They're Jewish.
Wow.
Sorry, boys. Deal with it. Demonstrating that we've been right all along, that the Benjamite Shaul became the Roman Paul and switched allegiances, condemning Jews while claiming to save Gentiles. And because he recognized that the former were, and he did so literally, because he recognized that the former were too well informed to believe him, while the latter were sufficiently steeped in pagan lore, anti-Semitism, and covetousness to lap up his theoretical and theological toxin as if it were their mother's milk. Before we share Acts 13, 48, and 49, I had a reason a couple of days ago to track down when Shaul became Paul. Do you guys know when Shaul became Paul?
Well, after he left the area, I guess, when he started on one of his journeys to Greece, I would think.
Yeah, after he started on one of his journeys. Because he was Shaul when Satan blinded him and made him lame on the road to Damascus, right?
Yeah.
And he was greeted in Damascus as Shaul. When he was out preaching against circumcision, he was Shaul. When he was reprimanded in Jerusalem by Yosha's disciples, he was Shaul. As he traveled out of the Promised Land and to the island of Cyprus is where Shaul first became Paulos. It's a really interesting story, and I was wrong. One of the things I found out is that, well, I was wrong, but the surprise comes here in a moment. Let me read to you out of Psalm 18:4, Mizmor 18:4, which leads into this as to why I thought it was appropriate to tell the story about how Shaul became Paul. It reads, "I'm being entangled in the swirling religious cords and company of the deadly plague and the torrents of those who are vile, rebellious, and unruly as a result of being confused and confounded, who have sought to torment me, to overwhelm and overtake me." Now, this seems to predict replacement theology, which is the fulcrum upon which Christianity pivots, and it served as the basis of Paul's arguments against the Torah and the Bereth, as well as the Mikra. Shaul's tentacles, this is now Mizmor Psalm 18:5, Shaul's tentacles, the binding implements and boisterous religious processions, the institutions requiring a binding oath and pledge of allegiance, the broken offensive company and ruinous rigging and noose, even the fibrous threads, spin around me and change me. Shaul's tentacles alter my purpose and direction, transforming my intent by turning everything around regarding me. And they're coiled around me and encircling me. They immobilize me. This is Dowd speaking, as they seek to reverse my course.
Wow.
They approach and confront me, making claims about me with their enticing lure of the plague of death.
Oh.
Wow.
Wow.
So, this is about Shaul. Now, Christians, you say Shaul, most Christians go, who's that?
Yeah,
Shaul is your Paul. And so I decided I would I would study it again, because this is really interesting. When you read this, it means that the wayward soul that Yahweh called the plague of death, he changed his name from Shaul to Paulos. Immediately before he, Shabbat, reversed course and spun everything around regarding Dowd's purpose, with his tentacles coiling around him to immobilize the Messiah, such that he could alter his intent. In so doing, the Meweth, the pandemic disease he was spreading, was given Moketh, an enticing lure, enabling the father of lies to capture and control his victims. Now, with stakes this high, and at this juncture, this bears stating, the self-proclaimed apostle Shaul was immobilized and blinded by Satan, and was summoned by that name, as his ambitions led him to go from personally murdering a handful of Torah-observant Yehudim to creating a new religion, which would turn the world against Jews, universally discrediting them and nearly wiping them out. It wasn't until having been exposed and condemned as anti-Torah by Yosha's disciples in Jerusalem, and then rebuked again by Yahusha on Cyprus, that Shaul changed his identity, becoming the anti-Semitic Greco-Roman the Gentile world would honor as Paulos. Now, this is just amazing. Remember how in this chapter, this is chapter 4 that we've been studying of the first volume of Coming Home in Our Time. And we began somewhere around Acts 13, like 13 or 14. Well, maybe I should have begun at Acts 13:6. This is how it reads. Upon encountering a certain magician, a Jewish false prophet, whose name was Bar-Jesus. Bar is the Aramaic word for son. It's Bar versus Ben. Ben is the Hebrew word for son. So Bar would be child of, and he would have written Iusus. Of course, there wasn't a Jesus until the 17th century. Therefore, we're dealing with Yosha. The Aramaic Bar means child, and the Hebrew name transliterated by the Greek Iusus is Yahusha. Now, we know that Paul didn't say that this man's name was Jesus, because that name wouldn't exist for another 16 centuries. However, since Jesus has been systematically deployed by Christians to replace Yahusha, and Paul have told the truth, we can no longer say that Paul never met with Jesus. Met with him right here when he changed his name on the island of Cyprus. As we know, the world's most nefarious false prophet immediately went out destroying his credibility by saying, but Elimas, the magician, and then in a parenthetical in Paul's hand, for thus his name is translated, was opposing them, seeking to turn the proconsul away from the faith, Acts 13:8. Well, that's simply not true. I went to more than 20 Christian sites to see how they can rectify, they can justify the fact that Paul just said that Elimas was a translation of his name, which he previously said was Yahusha. Well, Elimas is not a translation of Yahusha, so why is it that the 20 Christian sites that I went to all say that, well, Elimas is an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Jesus? What is it about being a Christian that causes you to be stupid? It's just not true.
You must protect the lie at all costs.
Yes. Now,
that's probably, that's it.
Elimas begins with Eli, E-L-Y.
God.
You do a fair amount of translation. JB, what is El? What's El? Okay, God's title. And when you put a Y after a word like that, what is it? How does it affect the word? What does the Y do at the end of it?
My.
That is correct. So we're dealing with my God. So his name, Elimas, begins with my God. Now, mas is not a word that we see a lot in Hebrew. So you might not immediately know what mas is, but I looked it up. You know what mas means? It means to reject, to despise, and abhor, a loathsome individual. Therefore, rather than serving as a translation of Yahusha, Yahweh saves, as Shaul falsely claimed, Elimas conveys, my God despises and rejects this loathsome individual. It should have been Paul's epitaph. Yahusha's God rejected Shaul.
I think that's my new nickname for Paul. So I'm just going to start calling Paul that.
Yeah, the rejected and despised.
Elimas.
Wow.
Yeah. Using a deceiver's favorite ploy, Shaul mitigated future criticism and confused his audience by projecting his faults on Yahusha, this whom he claimed was a false prophet, saying, but Shaul, who was also Paul, this is now the first time he's called Paul, this is Acts 13:9, but Shaul, who was also Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit, fixed his gaze upon him and said, you are full of all deceit and fraud, you son of the devil, you enemy of all righteousness. You will not cease to make crooked the straight ways of the Lord. Yahusha was truthful, and it was Shaul, now Paul, who was the son of the devil. We know this because, having read the prophets, we are aware that Yahweh unambiguously identified Shaul as the son of evil and the father of lies. And yet, by recasting Yahusha as the devil, while discrediting his testimony and nullifying his actions, Yahusha would no longer represent Yahweh saving us. Over the course of a few words, Satan's apostle upended reality, such that this Roman communicating in Greek was representing God and telling the truth, while Yahusha was not, and that neither Hebrew nor Jews could be trusted. Recognizing that Satan is the Lord, the newly minted Paulos said, and now, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon you, and you will be blind and not see the sun for a time. Acts 13:11. For those not similarly blinded by their faith, this encounter immediately before Shaul Paul did as Dowd had just predicted, is a call to reason and away from the religion for those whose perverted scriptures proclaim God raised him from the dead so that he would never be subject to decay, as God said, I will give you the holy and sure blessings promised to David. That was Acts 13:34. For the deceptively devious, this was their means to deceive on behalf of their duplicitous prophet and to keep their disingenuous faith from being dismissed as dishonest. With his transition away from Shaul, question him, the principal author of the Christian New Testament was telling the observant that he did not take kindly to Jews questioning his nonsense. Neither the Jewish disciples in Jerusalem nor this particular Jew in Cyprus. He had come to despise those who held him accountable, who exposed the fact that he was a false prophet. And since Yahudim comprised the totality of those who knew the Torah and prophets sufficiently to confront his errant rhetoric, Shaul started degrading the credibility of those commissioned with speaking for Yahweh. By the way, this is the exact same reason that the Quran turns anti-Semitic towards the end. Because the Quran doesn't begin anti-Semitic. Yahweh's book certainly doesn't begin anti-Semitic. It turns that way. How does the Quran, why did Muhammad turn on Jews? Because it's the exact same reason that Paul turned on Jews.
Could expose him, yeah, of course.
They were both liars. They were both twisting the Torah, prophets, and Psalms to soothe their interest. And the people that could hold him accountable, both of them accountable, could expose and condemn them as liars were Jews. And as a result, Jews had to be denigrated. Their testimony and their veracity had to be called into question. And better yet, they had to be obliterated. That's how thin-skinned Muhammad and Paul were. That is the reason that the Christian New Testament and the Quran are so anti-Semitic, is that Jews were the only people on earth that knew enough about Yahweh, his Torah, prophets, and Psalms to expose them as liars. In his transition to Apollos, Paul revealed his newfound affinity for the Greek god Apollo. Apollos is based on Apollo, and his preference for Roman words and ideas. The fact that Apollos conveys lowly and little in Latin demonstrates that a man with his ego did not choose it for what it means, but instead for what it represents, the sun god of the Greeks. This reality is underscored by the fact that Paul's linguistic skills were so inept, he believed that Elimas was a translation of Yahusha. What I've just shared with you is from chapter 8 of Coming Home at Our Time. But when we were talking about this transition from the Roman Paul becoming, having switched away from the Hebrew Shaol, since I just learned it yesterday, I wanted to share it with you. It's I've actually added it to this chapter that we're working from now earlier on, so that it's there because it actually comes from Acts 13, which is what we're reading from. Well, when this is Acts 13, 48 and 49. When the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and honored with the word of the Lord, and all who were appointed for eternal life believed. By the way, appointed for eternal life. Appointed for eternal life. What does that mean? Appointed for eternal life.
Well, it doesn't mean you're answering a call.
That means you're predestined.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Predestined. You know, when some Christians began to recognize that, like Calvin, the Presbyterian,
in particular,
came to recognize that if you study Paul, Christianity is about predestination. Now, predestination precludes choice. Predestination means that the entire thing from beginning to end is a farce.
Yeah, there's no free will in that.
Yeah, if there's no free will, don't bother. You know, Muhammad was also about predestination. Satan really likes predestination because Satan is predestined. He doesn't have choice. He was predestined to spend eternity in Sheol. But predestination doesn't exist with anyone else. Doesn't exist with humanity who are given free will. But that's what Paul wrote nonetheless. And when he said we're appointed to eternal life, he made this tragic mistake. God's not the only one. He's made 1,000 tragic mistakes. But when the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and honored with the word of the Lord. Why? Because Paul was telling them that all of the promises that had been made to the Jews were being taken from them and given to them. And all who were appointed to eternal life believed. Why bother to believe if you're appointed? The word of the Lord, who is Satan,
very good
spread through the whole region. Yeah. He told them what they wanted to hear.
That's the problem with any religion that believes in predestination. What's the point of anything? Either you're going to be in heaven or you're not. It's already been determined, so what's the matter what I do?
Why bother to know anything? Why bother to learn? Why bother to share? That's like Allah's black rub. That's right. Yeah, there was a back rub at the time of Adam, and all of those who were predestined for hell got in the hell line. All those predestined to the Islamic heaven, the brothel, got in the brothel line. That was just it. Yeah, it doesn't matter. What's the purpose? For all practical purposes, Paul had become their Messiah and their God. He would inspire and write to their scriptures. He had told them that they had become the chosen people, that salvation was free, and that all they had to do was believe him. While he had to lie through his teeth to make these claims, it would not matter, because the Christian religion would be based on faith and didn't require believers to do as Dowd had done and differentiate between right and wrong, truth and lies. It wasn't enough for Shaol to dupe Gentiles, since the Jews were sufficiently informed to realize Shaol was perverting their Torah and prophets. Those who knew the truth would have to be repudiated and discredited. From this moment on, any Yahud who exposed Paul as the liar he had become, who pointed out the obvious and copious conflicts between his words and those of God, would be dismissed and abused as a Judaizer. Now, mind you, there is no such thing as a Judaizer. Never has been, never will be. Religious Jews are indeed fixated on having influence over Jews. That's why there's no constitution in Israel. But the governing letter of agreement splits power between the rabbis and those in the political scene. And what the rabbis want is control over religion and people's lives, and to have Judaism be the one acknowledged religion of the land, with them obviously in charge of it. And that's a real serious problem for Jews. But what Jews never do is they don't evangelize to Goyim. They don't trust Goyim for good reason. Goyim have annihilated them through the years.
There's a little
the last thing they want. The last thing they want is for Goyim to convert to Judaism. So there's no such thing as a Judaizer, but nonetheless, it's a term that Paul loved using. But the Jewish leaders, Paul said, incited the God-fearing women of high standing. God-fearing. If
that's a concept I could never get behind. If you're supposed to, that was one of the reasons why I was agnostic for the longest time. I don't get this idea of fearing God.
Yeah. Why would you want a relationship with? Why would you want to spend time with someone you had to fear? What kind of a being would God be if he wanted inferior beings to fear him? It's just mind-bogglingly stupid. Well, the Jewish leaders incited the God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city. Now, Jews, religious Jews, like religious Muslims, and even fundamentalist Christians, there's separation between the sexes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there is a 0% possibility that Jewish leaders would incite women. It just doesn't happen.
They're not even used as a witness.
No, they might.
They have no status. Really no
right,
status.
and particularly in Islam, they would never incite a woman.
Worse there.
No. And control of women was not done through leadership collectively. It was done individually. A woman was controlled by her parents and then controlled by her husband. And so this idea that the Jewish leaders somehow interfered with and tried to incite high-standing Jewish or high-standing women. No. And in fact, there really weren't any high-standing women. Well, in this ancient time, the Romans didn't give a lot of rights to it. You know, if you didn't have a son, you couldn't pass on control of anything. You know, so women didn't have any. No, women in the Roman world, women didn't have any power. The Greek world, women didn't have any power. The Christian world, women didn't have any power. In the Islamic world, women don't have any power. In Rabbinic Judaism, women don't have any power. So the idea here is the same idea that Muslims have. Muslims justify their worldwide jihad against non-Muslims because they claim that non-Muslims have harassed and killed and raped Muslim women. Well, Muslim women are abused. There's no question about that. But
yeah, by Muslim
men. You just don't have to go very far, you know.
Yeah, the abuse of Muslim women is perpetrated by Muslim men. So, but the Jewish leaders inside, this is all a lie. The God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city, they stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from their region. I want to tell you, that's one thing the Jews don't do. That's one of the most amazing things, and Paul is establishing a conspiracy here, that the Jews sought to persecute the Christians. It's just not true.
It's never been the case.
Never been the case. It was the Gentiles of Rome and then of Roman Catholicism that not only sought to persecute and harass the Jews, but did so for 2,000 years, nearly annihilating them. So Paul created the myth that the idiots that are now conspiracy advocates and that want to go off and kill Jews are those in Europe who encouraged and went along with the Holocaust. You know, the Holocaust happened not because of Adolf Hitler. It happened because the preponderance of Christians in Europe
hated Jews.
Thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
And, you know, even in Germany, there were tens of thousands of places where Jews were harassed. Tens of thousands. It wasn't just in the concentration camps. You know, Jewish women became sex slaves for the German troops.
Army, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. They had to make munitions. They were an enslaved workforce. They were everywhere. You know, you would not have to look very far if you were a German to see Jews abused, and you knew that all of the Jews all around you were taken from their homes and sent off in trains. And you knew that their apartments and their property and their possessions were all stolen. And you knew they were rounded up. You knew it. And you knew it if you were French. You knew it if you were Polish. You knew it if you were Danish. You knew it if you were in the Ukraine. You knew it no matter where you were that this was occurring. And it occurred because the vast preponderance of people were corrupted with this Pauline poison of conspiracy that Jews were stirring up prosecution and persecution against the church when the opposite is true.
What power base did they have that they could do all this damage they're supposed to be doing? They just don't. Not only would they not do it, I don't see where they...
You look at Roman law. Roman law gave Jews no rights. You look at the early Christian church, and for all of its history, they gave absolutely no rights to Jews. They were treated worse than domestic animals. The Christians had the power, and they used it to abuse and persecute Jews. So they shook the dust off their feet as a warning to them. As a warning. What were they warning them? And went to Iconium And the disciples were filled with joy in the Holy Spirit. The disciples were in Jerusalem. No disciples out here. Who does Paul think he is? The new Jesus? Evidently so. Yeah,
well, yeah,
evidently so.
Yeah. Rhetorical, right?
Yeah, and thus ends the reading of the Lord's satanic scriptures, with Paul's disciples filled with joy at their Lord's warning to the dastardly Jews. It is telling that this despised and despicable soul consistently establishes himself and his Lord as anti-Semitic. According to the father of lies and the plague of death, the word of the Lord spread through the whole region. The Jewish leaders incited the God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city, stirring up persecution against Paul, expelling him from their region. Well, it's obvious that Shaul was busy spreading the word of the Lord. The rest of this is a lie. One crafted to divide the world such that Gentiles would come to justify their hatred of Jews, and such that there would be two covenants and two testaments, one old, one new, one ineffectual for the Jews, and Paul's gospel of grace for the rest of the world. Now, before we delve into the root cause of Christian anti-Semitism, which is where we're headed, let's be honest about Yehudim. Their relationship with Yahweh was strained during Dowd's reign, and it's only gotten worse since that time. They assimilated into Greek culture and lost most everything which made them special. And they became a house divided against Rome. These problems became such an issue, it all boiled over into a civil war after the death of Queen Alexandra Shalom, spurred on by infighting between her sons Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, as they vied for the thrones of chief priest and king, along with the conniving Antipater and Idumean. The resulting chaos and military alliances became unsettling for Rome. So after his deputy worsened the problem by accepting bribes, the Roman general Pompey, sometimes called Pompey, but I think Pompey is the proper pronunciation.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Intervened and commenced a brutal 3-year siege on Jerusalem, beginning in 66 BCE. Did you know that Rome didn't besiege? Everyone thinks of Rome besieging Israel 70 and they destroyed the temple because that's a big event for Christendom. And of course that was a minor assault compared to what happened with Hadrian coming back in 133. As a result of Rabbi Akiva having this false Messiah and the uprising and the like, and that was considered the second assault, but it was actually the third. The first occurred at 66 BCE. I watched the last couple of nights on Netflix. Sometimes in the evening I just need to unwind. I sit in this chair and translate and write for 8 to 10 hours a day, and you finally get to a point where you say, I just got to go do something else.
Take a break.
And I got to take a break. And I watched the series on the Roman Empire, and the most recent was the rise of Julius Caesar. Well, Julius Caesar created the triumvirate with Cassius and with Pompey, and if you consider the kind of man that Pompey was, this was one of the most despicable, disingenuous generals to ever have power in Rome. And he was the one that took credit for the putting down the revolt of Spartacus when it was actually more Julius Caesar than anyone else. And then when Julius Caesar lost his proconsul position above the Roman Senate because of Pompey. Pompey ousted him and sent him off to be a governor of nowhere, which in this particular case was on the border next to Gaul. He thought that would get rid of him, and then Pompey took the proconsul position, which was essentially the pseudo-dictator over Rome. Well, Julius Caesar said, well, the heck with that. I can come back into Rome and reclaim my position if I do something extraordinary, and extraordinary would be that I come to invade and occupy, expanding the Roman borders further than anyone ever have, and I conquer Gaul. So Julius Caesar sets off, and on his own, with relatively few men, I think it was in the range of 20,000, and he conquers Gaul. At one time, he is outmanned in the range in the middle of what is today's France, and he is outmanned, I think, 4-1, and he is trapped between two walls that he has built with vicious soldiers on both sides, and outnumbered at least 4-1. He manages to prevail, and he conquers Gaul. And on the way back to Rome, it's Pompey that convinces the Roman Senate that this man, whom the whole city is in love with, for he's the greatest conqueror in Roman history. They say, well, if he's going to come back here, he's going to be so popular, he's going to be more powerful than any one of us can deal with. Well, what he's going to do is he was going to get back at Pompey for throwing him out of the proconsul position. And so it was actually the Roman Senate. I've always thought that it was Julius Caesar that came back with a head too big and decided that he was going to be emperor. The heck with the republic. That wasn't the case at all. Version. Yeah, that's not the case at all. The reason that he crossed the Rubicon, that little stream that separated where you could bring in a legion, was because the Roman Senate was convinced by Pompey to, rather than regard Julius Caesar for what he had just done, to condemn him, to strip him of his control over the legions, and then to try him for treason and kill him. So what was he going to do? There was nothing he could do. So the Roman Senate is the reason that was the demise of the Roman Republic and became Imperial Rome, because Caesar came back in, and as he was coming back in with his legions, of course the Senate hightailed it out of town. The city went into total chaos, and Pompey went with them to Greece to rally and find legions that they could call upon to wipe out the legions that Julius Caesar was the head of. And Pompey, with twice as many men and well supplied, and Greece was resoundingly defeated by Julius Caesar. And that whole story is just so interesting, as it reveals this disgusting corruption and decadence and violent nature of Rome. So, this is the country, this is the empire that Paul wrote in his Ode to the Romans, in the 13th chapter of his
bow down to them.
Maxim Opus, his book to the Romans, the book that is the basis of the Christian religion, the book of Romans, that all governments are created by God, and that we should submit to them, and they're a force for good. And you look at this, and it's just so astonishingly despicable. Anyway, this man Pompey was among the worst of a worse lost. Now, he intervened in this particular case, 66 BCE, and commenced a 3-year siege on Jerusalem, and that's what ended Yehuda's independence. In the process of becoming a tributary province of the Roman Republic, Pompey saw to it that 12,000 Jews were slaughtered by Pompey's forces. 66 BCE. Having gained access into the city by building ramparts from the north into the Temple Mount and deploying battering rams constructed in Tyre, the pompous Roman immediately desecrated the Holy of Holies within the temple. The kingdom of Judea was then dismembered, forced to relinquish the coastal plain, depriving it of access to the Mediterranean, as well as much of Samaria, greatly diminishing the state. Greek assimilation had been bad, but not nearly as debilitating as Roman subjugation. That's why Rome is listed as the most deadly and gruesome, the most vicious beast. And out of them, we're told that the beast that would tread upon the whole world would emerge. And out of imperial Rome came the Roman Catholic Church.
Let me ask you a question.
Unified. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, at what point did the priest at the temple recognize that this is a losing battle and they hid the Ark of the Covenant? We know it's hid. Was it during the 66 era? No. Well before then.
I think it was hid during the Babylonian onslaught, because it was hidden in a place called Jeremiah's grotto. When the Babylonians, when the Babylonians took all of the temple fittings and all of the important, the parts of the temple menorah and the like, because so did the Romans. The Romans took the menorah too.
Yeah, they have that on the statue. I mean, on the relief sculpture. Yeah.
The Ark of Titus there. When they took all of that, and the Babylonians, unlike the Romans, gave it back. The Romans melted it all down and used the stolen loot to fund the construction of the most decadent human building of in world history, the Roman Colosseum. But the Babylonians gave it back. But when the Babylonians looted the temple, they did not have the Ark of the Covenant, because the Ark of the Covenant had been moved to Jeremiah's grotto. The reason the Ark of the Covenant had to be in Jeremiah's grotto is because when Yosha became the Passover lamb, the blood of the Passover lamb is always sprinkled on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And so it had to drip down through that earthquake hole needlessly beneath the upright pole upon which he became the Pesach lamb. And it was sprinkled on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, which is why the Ark of the Covenant is directly below Golgotha, and why it sits there to this day. And for those that would be curious and want to see it, my suggestion would be, wait until such time as Yahweh wants to show it, because he will show it. And between now and then, it'd be a really bad idea.
Probably, yes. Yeah.
To think that you could be Indiana Jones and gain credit for revealing this to the world. That would be
No, don't do that.
Yeah, spend your time translating the Torah. Do something worthwhile. Don't go and do that. There'll be time enough for that.
Now, that just one more question. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I was just going to say that, so from that point on, every time they have Pesach and they have the temple and they're sprinkling the blood, what are they sprinkling it on? They know that it's not there.
Oh, no.
They make another set?
Yeah, no, there's two aspects of Rabbinic Judaism, and I like the term Rabbinic Judaism because that's the nature of the religion. It's Rabbinic Judaism, and most people say, well, what's Rabbinic Judaism? Well, it's the only form of the religion that has survived. So if you're practicing Judaism, it is Rabbinic Judaism.
That's the one.
And what the rabbis did is twofold. The rabbis had this real problem because the Torah actually speaks of Loe, what's called the Levites, but the Loe serving Yahweh and in terms of administrating everything that Yahweh wanted communicated to his people, so that when they celebrated the Moed Mikra, the invitation is to meet with God and to be called out by him, the individuals doing it such that the symbolism held true and that they would understand what was happening were the Loe. And so for the rabbis who were not Loe to claim this position of religious authority, they had to ignore what God actually said. It's interesting because in one of the I think it's in Jeremiah that I just translated, Yahweh was really clear, and he says, not only am I bringing Dowd back, but I'm bringing back the Lowy. And there will never again be a time without the Lowy. So he's just telling the rabbis, you can stick it, up where the sun don't shine. Yeah. Your days are numbered, and you know it, and I know it. So let's just be matter of fact about this. But what the second thing that the rabbis did is that without a temple, they had to craft their Talmud so that their religion could be practiced without doing any of the things that Yahweh prescribed. It's one of the reasons why I tell people that they want to be Torah observant and they pick their things, and the thing might be I'm not going to eat pork, and I said, well, are you aware that the vast preponderance of the things that Yahweh instructs in His Torah cannot be done? They can't be done because there is no temple, because we don't have our access to the Ark of the Covenant, because there are no Lowy. So the majority of things there you can't do.
That's 90% of Leviticus.
Right. Yeah, you can't do anymore. And so because you can't do them, try to bring a lamb into your home 4 days before Pesach and then slaughter it before your family. And see how that works.
And your neighbors.
I think
and the neighbors end up in jail.
What is it, PETA?
See how that works for you. So what I became very cognizant of very early on is that since Torah means teaching, not law, it isn't about laws that cannot be obeyed. It is instead about teaching from which we can learn.
I understand.
Everything, right, including pork, swine, is a lesson to learn. It's not a law to obey. It's a lesson to learn from. And you can learn from all of it, even though you cannot obey most of it.
Yes.
So they created a religion whereby they established their own rules, and those rules ignored everything Yahweh had to say, so that without a temple, no problem. We're going to make our religion based upon kosher food and kosher laws, and about laws pertaining to the Shabbat. So you can't turn on a light, you can't cook, you can't kindle a fire, you can't walk more than a certain number of steps, you can't do diddly squat. Well, that's what they did, Kirk. They just they created laws because they couldn't do what Yahweh said.
The only way you can get power.
Yeah, the only way you can get power. Now, the unified ranks between Jewish religious and civil leaders portrayed by Paul throughout the gospel simply was not true. The Pharisees, for example, were completely intolerant of Rome. When they heard that Pontius Pilate would be bringing his army from Caesarea to Jerusalem, they encouraged thousands of religiously conservative Jews to walk 70 miles to Caesarea and then lay prone around Pilate's house for 5 days, all in objection to the effigies of Emperor Augustus that were emblazoned on the standards of his infantry. The Sadducees, however, wanted to coexist with the occupiers in opposition to the Pharisees. Now, things got especially tense when Yesius Flores accepted bribes from robbers and released them from prison, allowing them to continue their thievery so long as they shared their stolen loot with the Roman overlord. Making matters worse, because the bribes and share of the booty proved insufficient, Yesius began acting like a Roman Catholic pope and started robbing the temple treasury. When the people protested, Yesius marched his troops into the city and turned them loose to plunder and kill Jews. The Zealots then responded in kind and began killing Romans and their collaborators. Then, at the temple itself, the Jews stopped these twice daily offering of a sacrificial bull to show their submission to Rome. Fearing that another revolt would have devastating consequences, as a house divided the most affluent of Judea, requested more Roman troops be brought in support of Gessius and his stooge, Agrippa II, grandson of Herod. So it was in September 66 CE that Gessius sent 2,000 cavalry into the city. And after 7 days of carnage on both sides, Agrippa's forces were driven from the city. The zealots, after taking Masada, returned to Jerusalem with an arsenal of weapons. Demonstrating that Jews were more divided than united, however, on the Shabbat they burned the palace of the high priest in the south, Agrippa's palace towards the east, and they stormed the fortress Antonia north of the temple, killing the Roman cohort. They set upon Herod's palace in the west and massacred all but the leader of his garrison. It was a day of mayhem. Then, even among the zealots, there was conflict, with the larger faction driving the Sicarii out of the city and killing their leader, Menahem. In response, the Roman general, Cistius Gallus, marched from Antioch, the capital of the Syrian province of Imperial Rome, with the legion comprising 18,000 men. They destroyed every Judean town that didn't capitulate. They entered the city as the Zionists retreated to the Temple Mount. But the Romans began undermining its foundation of the temple while setting its gate ablaze. Then Gallus cowered, snatching defeat from the hands of victory, as it were. Seizing upon the opportunity, Jews chased the retreating Roman army, inflicting really heavy damage. And by the time they had reached Benzintha, Jews had killed 6,000 Roman soldiers, forcing Gallus to abandon his weapons and his possessions. Prominent Jews fled Jerusalem to escape the inevitable Roman retaliations. The Romans always retaliate. The Romans are sort of like today's incarnation of the Roman Empire, the Americans. You know, if you kill 3,000 Americans at Pearl Harbor, we will sacrifice 300,000 Americans to get revenge. Rome was the same way. You kill 6,000 Romans, even if we had to lose 60,000 Romans and sacrifice that many, we'll do so. That's just the immorality of that kingdom. So, evidence of this house divided. A priest named Joseph ben Matthias. Ever heard of him? Probably not.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, he's known today as, you're a historian. Kirk, you know what his name is today? What he's called today?
That's Josephus, isn't it?
Yeah, Flavius Josephus. Yeah, Flavius Josephus. He trained a Jewish army, said to number 65,000, based upon the Roman model. Now, so everybody's following along. I know we've covered a lot of ground. What I'm doing here is that we began by showing, we began here in this chapter by revealing what Yahweh revealed in the 89th Mizmor Psalm, which is just devastating to Christianity, and presents Dowd as the Messiah, the King of Kings, the individual who is going to participate in the second coming, and everything positive you could say about an individual, the Son of God and the Messiah. And we then tried to figure out how it was that the person God chose to anoint as the Messiah had that title stripped from him and given to the Passover lamb, Yosha, who became Jesus. What was it then that turned the Christian New Testament into an anti-Semitic document? Based upon this replacement theology of taking everything that God had promised to Dowd and giving it to Christians and to their Jesus, to give them credibility that they did not otherwise have. And so we pursued Shaul's speech as it's recorded in his first speech, really, as it's recorded in Acts 13. And that brings us to where we are now. And before we go and we talk about why the Christian New Testament is so resolutely anti-Semitic, I thought it was appropriate, and that's why we're covering this now. I thought it was appropriate to set the context so we know that why Jews had foregone that very special place in Yahweh's family for which they were chosen. And what they did, many of the things they did, clearly understandable. And, if after Rome had done this to them, since, now it's been since 66 BCE with Pompey, all the way now through 70 CE, there's good reason to despise these people. The Romans were despicable. They were savages. And so I understand why they would want to rebel against them. But it's important to understand that they did not rebel against Rome in the way that Hezekiah would have, where he returned to the Torah and allowed God to do his job, which is to protect his people. No, they did it with daggers and with swords, and they threw salt into the eyes of the devil, and so it's important, I think, to try to set the scene so that we know what was going on in Jerusalem and in the province of Yehuda as Pauline Christianity was beginning to take root, and to see how it developed to be so anti-Semitic under Roman influence. And it's also important to understand Rome, which is the ultimate, most vicious beast, according to Yahweh, as he goes through the history of the beast, as it goes from the first beast being Babylon to being, Babylon being conquered by Media-Persia, Media-Persia being conquered by the third beast, which would be Greece and the world of the Macedonia, of Alexander of Macedonia, and how that was divided into four kingdoms, and then ultimately conquered by the most vicious beast to ever exist, which is Imperial Rome, which then became the final beast that would tread upon the whole world, and the Roman Catholicism emerging and evolving out of Imperial Rome. So it's important to understand this transition of what is going on in the land that God views as so enormously important. And so at this time, we've got Jews fleeing Jerusalem. And they did so because they knew the Romans were going to retaliate. Others stayed to defend their country from the oppressive regime. And as further evidence that Jerusalem, Yisrael, Yehuda, really at this point, was a house divided. A priest named, as he said, Joseph ben Matthias, who's now known as Flavius Josephus. He tried to train a Jewish army numbering 65,000 in the Roman model. And opposition to him was the wealthiest Jew of his day, John of Giscala. Now, John of Giscala became wealthy because he held a monopoly on kosher oil. Now, he saw this priest turned general as a threat, and thus as a traitor. All the while, Nero ordered his most acclaimed general, Vespasian, to suppress the uprising. Vespasian assembled an army of 60,000 troops to raid the same Galilean towns, readily defeating the priestly Josephus, at least until he and his remaining troops took refuge in Japata, where the tide of the war turned. But it was not to be, alas, because after 47 days of attack with 50-foot armored siege towers and 160 siege engines, its walls were breached. But not until a Jewish deserter told Vespasian where the inhabitants would be most vulnerable. Now, Josephus and 40 other Jewish leaders hid out in a cave, and they made a suicide pact. Most people don't know this. And as they drew lots, this is Josephus. He was a slippery sucker. As they drew lots and began killing one another, Josephus arranged the game so that he was the last man standing. Yeah, and then when it was time for old Josephus to take his own life on the suicide pact,
got the pact. Yeah.
Guess
what? I don't think this is what God would want.
Oh yeah, he surrendered to a Roman officer.
Needs to live to tell the tale.
Oh yeah.
I'll tell you about your glory.
Yeah, he surrendered to a Roman officer who took him to Vespasian, whom he convinced that he was a prophet by telling the Roman general that he would someday be emperor. Well, great. Meanwhile, with Josephus out of the way, John of Gascala, the oil magnate, entered Jerusalem and lied, telling the zealots that the high priest Ananias and his associates were about to hand the city over to the Romans. That wasn't true, but it didn't matter. So the zealots brought in a mercenary army from Idumaea, which backfired. When they entered the city, the Idumeans went berserk, with the city and the temple drowning in blood. Now aware of the hoax, the oil tycoon broke with the zealots and formed a rival party. You know, when I watched the Romans under Julius Caesar conquer Gaul, he had conquered Gaul because the French couldn't get along with the French. And all he had to do is, even though he had a very small force and he had no supply line, all he had to do was just conquer one little tribe after another. And, well, that's what Israel became. They became a house divided and divided and divided again. Now, at the same time in Rome, Nero took his own life. Boy, I tell you what, as you look at the history of the Roman emperors, wow, what a absolutely revolting lot. You know, those people say Rome was grand. I'll tell you what, it had a dark, dark, dark heart. So Nero took his own life, giving Vespasian the opportunity he sought to become an emperor. So he left his son Titus to finish his dirty work. Josephus, you know, that's, by the way, one of the things that was also interesting. You know, the Roman Senate, we think of the Roman Republic. You know, Star Wars is based upon the Roman Republic. It wasn't a republic. You know how you became a senator?
Well, you
bought it.
You were a member of the Lucky Sperm Club.
Yeah.
If your daddy was a senator, you were a senator.
Mm-hmm.
If your daddy wasn't a senator, you weren't a senator. The only people who could become senators were the wealthiest Roman families, and of course in Rome, they were part of their own caste system. And you couldn't move up into that caste. You were born into it. So there was no more republic than the man on the moon. Now, those 600 super wealthy individuals got to vote among themselves, but let's be honest, they were. This was no more republic than a man on the moon. So anyway, with Josephus, we said, out of the way, the oil tycoon formed a party of his own, and at the time in Rome, we've got Vespasian going back, and so we've got a mess in Rome, a mess in Israel. So Titus tried to finish the dirty work, and Josephus, the priest turned general, who was now a Roman and free, became traitor. And Josephus started to work on behalf of the Romans, providing advice on how to most easily enter and conquer Jerusalem. It wouldn't take much, as it was already besieged in a three-way civil war, destroying itself. As some factions sued for peace, others attacked the Roman positions on the Mount of Olives, some inflicting heavy casualties. However, the Romans were vastly superior militarily to the people they had subjugated for the past 130 years. And as Josephus pleaded with Jews to surrender, Titus turned one wall after another into rubble. And yet, in one last great act of defiance, Jews managed to undermine and torch the Roman siege engines. In response, Titus built a 5-mile-long wall around the city to starve the Jews to death. And then when there was disunity with Jews fleeing the city to surrender to the Romans, there was a little problem. You see, they decided that, what we're going to do here is we're going to swallow our money. So they devoured gold coins, and they expected to extract them from their own excrement. But it backfired, because when the first was spotted picking coins out of his poop, the Syrians and Arabs who were serving the Romans gutted every Jewish escapee. It was so barbaric. Titus actually objected and made gutting a Jew a capital offense. But it was a lost cause. The temple was slowly being consumed by fire as a consequence of the Jewish assault on Roman siege engines and battering rams surrounding it. The final incident occurred when a Roman soldier threw a torch through a window and the temple was destroyed. Simultaneously, the Romans set the lower city ablaze. The remaining rebels hid in the sewers, only to be dragged out and killed. The city was razed. Titus took tens of thousands of Jewish prisoners, slaves, along with the temple's treasures, even its menorah, to Rome. The leader of the Zealots was chained through the nose and dragged to Rome, and then executed in the Forum. And of course, with their stolen treasure and with the slaves, the Romans built the Colosseum, which is easily the most decadent, despicable arena in human history. This is all to say that the notion of a unified crowd of Jews, of chief priests, of civic leaders, ordinary people, chanting in one accord and chanting with one voice is preposterous.
It's impossible to support, isn't it?
And all four of the Christian Gospels claim that the Jewish religious leaders and the Jewish people were all in unison, chanting in one accord to kill Jesus. I'm sorry. If you're willing to shed your ignorance, you'll know that everything that's said in the Christian New Testament was all conceived to create a conspiracy to abuse and murder Jews, to discredit them, because Jews, because of their knowledge of the Torah, the prophets, and Psalms, were the only people on earth that could prove that Christianity was based on a lie. That Jesus was not the Messiah. Dowd's the Messiah. They could prove that there could be no New Testament, that there was no New Covenant, that there was no such thing as replacement theology. They knew that all of Paul's citations of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms were corrupt. They were discredited, and they were annihilated because they alone could prove that the new religion was completely and utterly false. And by taking a moment to understand the conditions that existed between 60 and 70 CE, we know for certain that there is a 0% possibility that this unified chanting of Jews to kill Jesus is absolute nonsense. In reality, Rome killed him. And all the Jews did is they offered him up as the Passover lamb. For that, we should thank them. because that is the role he came to play. Yahshua is the Passover lamb, nothing more, nothing less, and that is enough. There's a reason that we don't have a single word Yahshua said in the language that he spoke it, credibly maintained, and that we have psalm after psalm from Dowd. One is the shepherd, whose advice the sheep need to hear. The other was the Passover lamb, who served an entirely different purpose. Last time I checked, the Passover lamb doesn't have a speaking role in the celebration of Pesach.
No. It has an important role. It's a vital role, but
right. Facilitates our going.
It's a single purpose.
Yeah. Speaking of unity, if you want 10 opinions, argue with a single Jew.
Have you ever watched Monty Python's Life of Brian?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think it's one of the funniest things.
The Judean People's Front of Judea. They can't even get together to unite against the Romans. They all have their own bickerings amongst each other.
If you can't unite against the Romans, then you can't unite for anything.
Yeah. I had a Jew tell me a joke one time, and it was about 2 Jewish people get stranded on a desert island. 5 years later, they're rescued. And when the people that rescue them show up, they're like, here, let us show you the houses we built and this. And they're showing them around all the stuff they did to survive. And they go, oh, and here's the synagogue I go to. And here's the synagogue he goes to. Well, what about that one? Oh, that's the synagogue neither one of us will go to.
By the way, synagogue. Is that a Hebrew word?
Greek.
Yeah, that sounds like Hebrew.
Yeah. Talk about God's people being corrupted. There's no Hebrew word for synagogue. Yahweh does not speak of a synagogue.
Never.
So even that shows and even the word for temple, the vast majority of the time when God speaks of that building that Dowd purchased the foundation and Solomon built, he doesn't call it a temple. It's a home. A house. Mm-hmm. Yes, the household for the covenant. Yeah. Yeah, God doesn't need a fancy place, not looking for a fancy place. That was why it was just so interesting when we studied that discussion that Dowd he was bellyache and said, here I live in this fine house of cedar, and all this time God's hanging out in out there in a tent, and Yahweh says, wait a minute, all this time I've been with you, did you ever hear me say, build me a house of cedar? Once did I ever ask you to build me a house? No. It's my job as your father to see to it that you're in a good house and to make sure that you're raised in a good home. It's not your job to build one for me. Yeah, so all these people that have the house of God, no, I'm sorry. That's the house of the Lord.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to turn the page and to consider the Christian New Testament, and in particular, what I wanted to do was to analyze the book of Matthew. And so when we return next week, I want to spend some time where we actually consider what transpired to make the Christian New Testament, beginning with the book of Mark, and then Luke and Matthew, which was copied from them. Matthew was not a disciple. The disciple, there was no disciple named Matthew. What caused those books, none of which were written by eyewitnesses, none of which were written by disciples, to be just so resolutely anti-Semitic? Why did they reflect Paul's rhetoric? and we're just going to do our best to systematically analyze them and figure out why. It's such an interesting story, and of course, I have to do a mea culpa because for a long time I had thought that there were two of the four eyewitness. The two of the four accounts were eyewitness. It's not true. There's one of the four that was written by an eyewitness, Yahowah, although it was heavily edited by the Roman Catholic Church. But just tiny aspects of what's now called the Gospel of Matthew were contemporaneously written, and what was contemporaneous we're going to find was in a book called According to the Hebrews, and it includes the story of the Sermon on the Mount. So it's always been a curiosity to me as to why you have this one standout discussion, the longest discussion anywhere of Yosha's speeches, and you have this Sermon on the Mount that is so destructive to the Christian religion. Why does it exist? And come to find out, it was chronicled in Hebrew in a book called According to Hebrew, and the small, tiny portion of what's now the Gospel of Matthew that wasn't plagiarized from Mark and Luke. The majority of it actually comes directly plagiarized out of Mark. And then the second largest portion of it is plagiarized from Luke. The little bit that adds a little bit of flavor to it is actually transcribed, giving it credibility from this according to Hebrew. And the rest of it was written between 80 or 90 CE and during the time of Eusebius and the 4th century CE.
I've been excited
That's
to
quite
get to this part since you first mentioned it. I haven't had time to read it yet, so I'm excited.
And
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and my take on having read forward is two things that just jump out to me. There's of course this is a very detailed attack on Christianity and proving everything we've been talking about is really, really true. And
this one is devastating on the Christian New Testament.
Devastating, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but
right.
The other side of the coin was that if I was Yehudim and being put down my whole life by this Christian mythos crap, which I quite frankly is not something I experienced or saw. Of course, I lived around a lot of different places, but it just wasn't our deal in our family. But boy, I would grab hold of this and just strike out. I'd say, listen, you sorry people.
Yes.
This is what you did, and this is how dare you accuse me of what y'all have done and put it all on me. I just God, I'd want this in my arsenal for any debate, any rebuttal. So it's a great stuff coming up. I mean, you don't want to miss this stuff.
It's so enormously sad. But what it I guess it would be just devastating if it wasn't for the fact that we're coming into this out of the 89th Mizmor. And the 89th Mizmor clearly establishes that Dowd David is the Messiah.
Yes.
That Dowd David is the King of Kings. That Dowd David was the one whom Yahweh immersed in his spirit. That Dowd David is the prophet. That Dowd David is the righteous branch. That Dowd David is the chosen one. That Dowd David is the Son of God. The basis of Bikurim is David, according to God.
Yeah.
And when you realize that everything that God communicated about and through and with Dowd, having chosen him to represent everything, including the covenant, has been systematically taken from him and given to this caricature of Jesus that's based on Dionysus so that the Christian religion gets this veneer of credibility, then what you recognize is that it is essential to expose and condemn these anti-Semitic aspects of Christianity that perpetrated replacement theology on the world, such that not 1 in a million people knows that Jesus isn't the Messiah, that it's Dowd. Not 1 in a million people knows that the King of Kings is Dowd, not Jesus. Not 1 in a million people knows that the second coming is with Dowd, not Jesus. Billions of people think that Jesus is the Son of God, but according to God, it's Dowd.
Yeah.
And what that represents in terms of Yahweh's testimony and his plan and his people. And so it's essential to understand how Christianity managed to twist all of this and to pervert it such that the greatest conspiracy ever perpetrated on humanity, which is blame the Jews, was ushered in by Paul and then picked up and run with by the Roman Catholic Church. Sometimes you have to clear away the clutter of lies before someone is willing and capable of pursuing the truth. And that's what we're doing. And it's for those willing to listen, who have an open mind, who are willing to be resolutely rational, what you're going to find is that the Christian New Testament is rubbish.
Yeah.
It's a religious plot to mislead.
Yeah. This allows you to walk away. That's the step number one. Just by once you see this, you go, oh, boy, I've been a duped all my life. Walk away.
Yeah.
Now pursue God. Now walk towards.
And I made so many mistakes. Like I always assumed that Mark was a confidant of and a translator
Peter.
For Shimon Kefesh, Peter.
No.
No. You read.
Well, that's what the party line.
When you read like the Book of Acts, Mark was one of Paul's entourage. Luke was part of Paul's entourage.
Yeah, well, Lucas.
And and the book Gospel of Matthew is simply plagiarized from Mark and Luke. So, I'm sorry, but your Gospels are all Pauline influence. They're Paul's pals. And Paul was the plague of death. And it gets worse and worse. The more you read, the more you realize how many times. In fact, in this most recent chapter that I'm doing, chapter 8 of Coming Home, I actually itemized the number of times that Shaul is brought up as this individual who is being condemned by God. Do you know it's 406 times?
Wow.
Well, it's just really surprising is that, you know what name is the most often repeated in the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms? And it's Yahweh's name is listed 7,000 times. Okay. Next in terms of frequency, it's Dowd.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 times. Yeah, I think it's 1,077 times. And then you have Moshe is third.
Makes sense.
The fourth is Shaul.
Wow.
He's fourth. And nobody bothers to figure it out. So we're going to figure it out. It's important, and it's particularly important for Yahweh's chosen people, because they have been duped, because they have been misled, and because they have been systematically harassed and assassinated. And we're now reaching the time of restoration and return, the time of acceptance, and we don't have a lot of time left. And so it's essential for Yisrael and Yahudah to recognize who Yahweh is, to recognize that he's calling you home, that he wants to restore his relationship. And the best way we can do that is to clear away the lies of religion that have so corrupted us to this point. So that's what awaits us, fellas.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Thank you. Best of all of our best to Terry over the upcoming week. Let's hope that well, there isn't a next, because so many of the next have not been good. She has really fought the good fight, and we hope all the best for Terry. And thank you, JB.
Thank you.
We look forward to being with you next week. Happy Shabbat to one and all.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night, JB. Night, Craig.
Good night. Good night.